Welcome to Project Animal Freedom's first annual Disabled Vegan Expo. You are probably here because, like me, your disabilities have profoundly shaped your life, and your experiences as a disabled person intersect with your commitment to animal rights in unique and interesting ways. You are here because you are firmly anti-speciesist and proudly anti-ableist. You are here because you want to learn more about the rich, fascinating, and fruitful intersection of disability rights and animal liberation. And you are here because you believe in a just, equitable society where everyone can thrive, regardless of ability or species. Whether or not you are disabled, this event offers value to you. You can deepen your knowledge of the interconnections between disability rights, animal liberation, and other social justice causes. You can celebrate the contributions of disabled vegans to the animal rights movement, and you can help us build a more inclusive movement for everyone in the process. Without further ado, please welcome Trudy Cazot, our first speaker of the day. Trudy has been an advocate for other animals since the mid-90s. She has a PhD in criminology on anthropocentrism and speciesism, and later worked in youth care and as a policy advisor. Now retired because of chronic diseases, she enjoys gardening, making activism-inspired quilts, and taking care of other animals at her micro-sanctuary. She is the editor of two anthologies, Humans and Other Animals in 2001, and Another Species / Kind of Sister in 2020, both written in Dutch. She also writes about vegans and animals' rights on Grasswortels, Bruges Vegan, and about the interconnections between ableism and speciesism on Crip Humanimal. She will deliver a riveting and highly instructive speech titled Veganism Isn't Ableist, but Unfortunately Some Vegans Are. In this talk, Trudy Cazot will discuss the claim that veganism is ableist, the claim that due to disability or chronic disease, not everyone can be vegan, and as such, veganism discriminates against disabled persons. She will present arguments to show that veganism is not an ableist ethical practice. Unfortunately, although veganism in itself is an ableist, some vegans or vegan or animal rights organizations or campaigns are ableist, and Trudy will address some example of such ableist practices. Trudy, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kyle, for that nice introduction, and you give me a lot of honor. That's I'm blushing. Well, good morning, everyone. Nice to see so many people showing up. Good evening for some, perhaps, in the UK, and maybe some others from continental Europe or other places in the world. So yes, I want to talk about veganism. My presentation is in two parts. So first, the claim that veganism is ableist, and then in the second part, I will give some examples of how the vegan movement is sometimes ableist, and the second part will be with slides, but the first part isn't. So I want to talk about veganism, so more specifically about a claim that I sometimes hear people make to dismiss or brush off veganism, or they use it as a reason for not going vegan themselves. And that claim is veganism is ableist. Now, I'm going to explain anyway. I think most people here will know, but for those maybe who don't, for those who are not familiar with the term, ableism is the discrimination of disabled persons, so discrimination based on having or lacking certain abilities. Those can be mental or cognitive abilities or physical abilities. So saying that veganism is ableist is saying that veganism is discriminating against disabled persons. So the argument that is used to ground this claim is that not everyone can be vegan due to disability or chronic disease. So asking people to go vegan is ableist. Now, this mostly refers to dietary aspects of veganism, that is plant-based eating, or to the use of medication. So the reasoning is that people who need to take medication, as many chronically ill or disabled persons do, they cannot be vegan. Because as you all know, I think you all know, vegans avoid products that have been tested on animals or that contain animal-derived products. And for medication, that's often the case. But many people cannot live without medication. So if veganism imposes, if it is a rule of veganism that you cannot take this life-saving medication, then veganism is ableist. And the same reasoning is also used with respect to people who cannot fully adopt a vegan or plant-based diet, for example, due to accessibility issues or medical issues. So, in that reasoning, those people cannot be vegan. because veganism also means avoiding animal-based products in your diet. And as these people cannot adapt a 100% plant-based diet, the reasoning goes, veganism is excluding disabled people or excluding chronically ill people and is as such ableist. So whenever veganism is discussed in disabled circles or in leftist circles also, this claim often, I would say even always, arises with a large section of people agreeing with this and as such rejecting and discrediting veganism. And not only by disabled persons themselves, but also by abled activists for social justice, progressive activists who dismiss veganism because they consider it ableist. So the statement is made by both able-bodied as disabled persons. Okay, now I'm really fully acknowledging these arguments, and I'm by no means ignoring or dismissing these concerns, because they are indeed very valid concerns: the medical issues, the accessibility of vegan food, the need to take life-saving medication. And I totally get where these arguments are coming from. I'm chronically ill myself. I define myself I consider myself as disabled. I have several autoimmune diseases and I have been taking medication for more than 30 years. And yes, I am vegan. I consider myself vegan. So I think the claim that veganism is ableist mostly rests on a misunderstanding of the very definition of veganism, which includes the phrase as far as is possible and practicable. So the definition as posted by the Vegan Society in the United Kingdom goes, veganism is a philosophy and a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. Now, the key element in this definition is the insertion of the phrasing as far as is possible and practicable. So as such, everyone can be vegan. Everyone can try to avoid the exploitation of other animals as far as is possible and practicable, also disabled persons, also chronically ill persons. If for some medical reason it is not possible to fully avoid the use of animal so-called products, for example for medication, there are many other aspects in your life where you can still try to avoid it to the best of your abilities. Because veganism is also about much more than medication and diet. Think of the use and exploitation of other animals for entertainment, clothing, cosmetics, and everything from home decorations to hobby material like paint or garment or the saddle of your bike. Vegans try to avoid using animal products for all those things and look for animal-free alternatives as far as is possible and practicable. Now, I know that the insertion of as far as is possible and practicable is a very subjective norm, and it leaves room for interpretation. And here is, of course, where the discussion starts. Who will decide what is possible and practicable in one's day-to-day life? Now, let me take an example from my own life. When I bought my first wheelchair, I was surprised to find out that the straps underneath the back cushion were made out of animal skin, so they were made out of leather. I asked to the manufacturer whether the leather straps in the backing could be replaced with non-animal, so synthetic or faux leather straps. The manufacturer agreed to replace this without any additional costs for me. But the manufacturer may not always provide that, or you may depend on a second-hand wheelchair, and if it requires additional costs, depending on one's social or economic situation, this might be out of reach for some disabled persons. So for me, this was possible and practicable, but it might not be for other disabled persons. Sometimes there might not even be animal-free alternatives for issues like this. Now, take the example of medication, which is very heavily debated in the vegan community. So I will expand a little bit more here. It's an issue that causes much debate inside the vegan and animal rights community. So yes, medication and also vaccines, to include an issue that has been discussed quite a bit in the last couple of years, they have been tested on other animals. The system requires medication by law to be tested on animals before it can be prescribed to patients. So all medication that is available has, at one point in the research and development phase, been tested on animals. There's no escaping that. So there are no alternatives for medication. There's no medication that has not been tested on animals. I also want to add here that all medical knowledge, the whole body of medical procedures, therapies, medication, and so on, is not only based on unethical experiments and tests on other animals, but is also gathered from unethical experiments on humans. Throughout history, there have been numerous examples of oppressed groups that have been subjected to scientific experiments, to test medication or therapies, or even to explore the anatomy of the human body. Think of medical experiments on prisoners, people confined in psychiatric hospitals, prisoners of war, women of color, and so on. I've read horrible accounts of prisoners of war during World War II, for example, about the effects of freezing temperatures on the human body, with POWs being placed outside till literally their limbs froze off. So horrible accounts, shocking accounts. But all that body of medical knowledge, how awfully and unethically it has been acquired, and of course I condemn these all wholeheartedly, they have helped to improve the treatment of frostbite. So this is also a point that I raise whenever non-vegans try to discredit my veganism or call me a hypocrite for taking medication as a vegan. And I ask them if they know that the medication they are also taking, or the therapies or medical procedures they have had, are based on knowledge from unethical human experiments. We cannot undo this body of knowledge. Even if experiments on animals were to stop now, today, the medication, the medical therapies, and the procedures that will be used in a century or even later on will still be based on knowledge acquired through unethical tests on humans and other animals. There's no escaping that. The other thing is that not taking medication or even actively boycotting it will not change the system that legally requires them to be tested on other animals. Vaccines or medication do not follow the same supply-demand logic like buying food or cosmetics do. As consumers, we can more or less vote with our dollar or put our money where our mouth is. And I know a lot needs to be said about capitalism and vegan capitalism and its excesses and its negative impact on humans and other animals, but that can then perhaps be the topic of another presentation. But the point I want to make is this. When it comes down to food, cosmetics, clothes, shoes, we can most often find suitable alternatives that fit our needs, that are accessible, that are affordable, or we can demand them. And in that way also steer the market and give an incentive to manufacturers to provide vegan alternatives. That is not the case for medication, since all are legally required to be tested on animals, and all medical knowledge is based on animal testing. And even if all vegans would refuse to take medication, that would not lead to legal changes to abolish the use of animals for experiments. If anything, it could lead to fewer people being able to advocate for animal rights, as they might not be able to do so because of their physical or mental condition. And by not taking medication, you not only put your own health at risk, but in the case of vaccines, for example, also the health of others, and especially people from risk groups. So not taking medication will not change the situation of animals. It will not bring an end to animal testing. What we can do as activists for animal rights and social justice is keep advocating for the end of the use of animals in experiments. We cannot change the past, but hopefully we can end the system in which animal testing is required by law. But as I said, the claim that veganism is ableist doesn't just refer to medication, but is also about food, for example. So another aspect that is often raised when making the claim that veganism is ableist is that not everyone can eat 100% plant-based diet. Now, I know this is a very delicate discussion. I fully acknowledge that there are several medical conditions that can make it very hard for some people to eat a balanced, varied plant-based diet. I'm thinking, for example, so not limited to gastrointestinal conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and autoimmune diseases like inflammatory bowel disease, IBD. That's IBD is an umbrella term for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. There's also food allergies or food intolerances, which can heavily limit your options, and it can be very difficult for people dealing with eating disorders as well. However, that being said, as far as I can tell from all medical knowledge that I have gathered, there's no medical condition that absolutely physically requires someone to eat animal products. But because of these conditions that I mentioned, and there are others too, it can be much harder to eat a fully plant-based diet because they limit the possibilities for someone to eat in a varied and balanced way. This can also have to do with, for example, the lack of access to fresh food, the lack of access to supplements, not having the abilities to prepare food yourself, or maybe even because of the lack of dietary knowledge or guidance in making the transition to a varied, balanced plant-based diet. So here again, the phrasing "as far as is possible and practicable" comes in. And that is, of course, a subjective norm that everyone applies to themselves against the backdrop of advocating for justice and respect for the rights of animals. And again, it needs to be stressed that diet is just one aspect of living vegan. So if the dietary aspect is one that you are struggling with, there are so many other ways to live a lifestyle in line with your ethics in support of animal rights. Now, I'm treading very carefully here, and I would really urge other vegans to be very cautious when they are met with a reply from chronically ill or disabled people that they cannot be vegan for health reasons. Because simply brushing it off with a statement, well, but everybody can eat a plant-based diet, without also knowing the background of that person, the difficulties they face, also their socio-economic situation, will possibly just backfire and shut down the discussion and end them from being open to veganism. Because as a chronically ill person, one is met with so much, maybe good meaning, but nonetheless often very frustrating health advice from ables. I cannot recall the number of times I had ad hoc dietary advice given to me. Sometimes also from people who have absolute zero dietary or medical background, and people who also can't even say the names of the diseases that I am diagnosed with. So please be careful in such discussions. If there's an opening, try to ask questions of what is making it difficult for them to eat a balanced, varied plant-based diet, and acknowledge that these issues can make it really hard. Try to offer possible solutions or ask them what could help them in transitioning. Don't shame or condemn them. One must also realize that a lot of patients get a zero to no dietary guidance from their medical supervisors, and that in the rare occasions that they do, the dietary guidelines given by medical staff just reflect the mainstream diet informed by a speciesist ideology that includes animals as food. So many patients, chronically ill patients, are just repeating what their doctors have told them. And unfortunately, many in the medical profession are not aware of the benefits of a plant-based diet and still advise to eat diets full of animal products. Now, I would like to add a personal example here. As one of the autoimmune diseases that I have is Crohn's disease, next to ankylosing spondylitis. That's a type of arthritis. So I was diagnosed more than 30 years ago, and I've been vegan for nearly 15 years and vegetarian long before that. Now, on patient platforms for people with IBD, so that's the term for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, I'm often met with disbelief and immediate rejection when I simply share a photo of a vegan dish of what I've eaten that day. My lunch dishes always contain a selection of raw vegetables, a slice of whole grain bread, things like almond tofu, hummus, scrambled tofu, maybe some fresh fruit and things like that. I have had my diagnosis of Crohn's disease questioned by fellow patients because they said it is impossible to eat a dish like that when having Crohn's disease. Many IBD patients have been told years and years to avoid fiber and raw vegetables. And yes, I agree, in certain periods, in flares, or after surgery. I also had surgery and I had to take care of it. It can be advised to eat low fiber, and high fiber foods can cause additional discomfort or even inflammation. But fiber and vegetables are essential for good gut health. And more scientific research is now advising more or fully plant-based food, also in the treatment of gastrointestinal diseases. And when, as an IBD patient, transitioning to a diet that contains more fiber, it is important to do that in phases. For example, start with blended food or fruits and veggies in smoothies so your gut can get used to it. So there's a lot of misunderstanding to be countered among chronically ill people, as also in the general population, about the benefits of a healthy plant-based diet. So to recap, veganism is taking a stance against injustice to other animals. It is trying to implement that in your day-to-day life by avoiding, as far as is possible and practicable, the use of animals in all day-to-day aspects. And this is exactly what all vegans, also disabled vegans and chronically ill vegans, do in their everyday lives. It might not be practicable or possible in all aspects of your life. Think of medication, but it surely is possible in a lot of aspects of your life. Vegans, also disabled vegans, avoid the use of animals as far as is possible and practicable, given their specific situation. I really think that saying that veganism is ableist is a sort of straw man argument. I acknowledge the issues disabled and chronically ill people can face when trying to implement a vegan lifestyle, but that takes nothing away from the philosophy of veganism and the ethics of animal rights. It takes nothing away from the fact that the way we use and abuse animals for food, clothing, in scientific experiments, and entertainment is wrong. It's unethical, and that we should try to change that. And by adopting a vegan lifestyle, one is taking a stance against the injustice that animals are subjected to. One is trying to move to a system in which animals' rights are taken into consideration. Now, to make an analogy, and I know this comparison might be flawed on several levels, but it's just to make the point. We know that our environment is in a poor state. We know about climate change. There's a whole body of scientific evidence that backs up the need to change the way we live and our impact on the environment. We know that we must take measures to try and improve the environment and halt or minimize climate change. But some of those measures or adaptations have been criticized by disability activists for being ableist and not taking into consideration the needs of disabled people. There are discussions about the use of packaging, like single-use plastics, plastic straws, public transport that is not accessible, inner cities becoming car-free but no longer accessible for disabled people, and so on. Those are valid and concerning issues, and they need to be addressed. But that doesn't mean that the need for environmental measures and measures to halt climate change should be thrown overboard or dismissed altogether. We must acknowledge that some measures are not accessible for all and try to make them as accessible as possible. In a similar vein, the fact that some aspects of a vegan lifestyle might not be accessible for all disabled people is no argument to ditch veganism. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Don't dismiss veganism, but if you are able to, put your efforts in trying to make all aspects of the vegan lifestyle accessible for all, and as accessible as possible for disabled people. Fight against ableism and speciesism. You can do both. They are not mutually exclusive. Advocate for the abolishment of testing on other animals. It especially frustrates me when I see ableists use the ableist argument to ditch veganism, as I feel they are using disabled persons as a prop in their rejection of veganism, without truly understanding the core of veganism, and also ignoring the fact that many disabled and chronically ill vegans do exist and do try to avoid using animals as far as is possible and practicable. So I, as a disabled person, don't want to be their excuse for them to continue using and abusing animals. I think their rejection of veganism is more often based on common mainstream speciesist ideologies and not understanding the interconnectedness of all oppressions. Sexism, racism, ableism, and so forth, and also speciesism. Now, for the second part of my presentation, I'm going to give some examples of ableism in the vegan movement. So I will share the screen. I hope this works. Can somebody confirm that you can see the screen?
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. So although veganism in itself isn't ableist, some vegans or vegan or animal rights organizations or campaigns are unfortunately ableist. So these will be some examples of ableism in the vegan and animal rights movement. About activism, this slide shows a silhouette of a fist holding a pen. I regret to see that activists are being shamed for not being present at rallies, demonstrations, or activist events. I see that happening a lot. So, for example, this was an example I saw on social media. This slide shows a person standing next to a street sign, and the sign says, "Imagine they delete Facebook and Instagram, and boom, you're not an activist anymore." I actually altered that meme and turned it into this text. Imagine you can't go outside to reach out, demo or march, and boom, you're not an activist anymore, which was very to the point in the pandemic when we couldn't go out on the streets anymore. So I've heard all kinds of sorts of variations on this theme. You're not a true vegan if you don't care for rescued animals. I saw that just the other week in an online discussion. You're not a true activist if you don't participate in demos or street activism. You're not a true vegan if you don't do volunteer work at a sanctuary. You're not a true activist if you only do online activism, and so forth. Now, activism comes in many forms, and some forms of activism are just not mentally or physically possible or accessible. There's so much focus on street activism, and people doing the most visible forms of activism are proclaimed the heroes of the movement. But there are many invisible forms of activism too. So please be aware that different types of activism appeal more or less to different people, and the time, place, and location will determine who you reach and who can come. And it's not just about having or not having the abilities to do certain forms of activism. For me, one of the most frustrating things of being chronically ill is the unpredictability of my condition. So some days I'm relatively well, other days I can't get up. And that makes it also very difficult to make engagements, also for activism. For example, if the organization requires that for volunteer duties, you follow a strict roster. For example, for me, giving this presentation today, I didn't know in advance when I commit to doing this, I would be able to actually do it on the day itself, because I might get complications, not being well enough. So that makes it very frustrating, very unpredictable. I know in the end, sometimes, or maybe even often, disabled people, chronically ill people, we don't have the energy or abilities to do any activism at all. But we're just struggling to survive ourselves. That doesn't make us any less vegan. When we say that veganism is easy, I also see this a lot. And of course, on the one hand, we want to stress that veganism is not that difficult as many people think, but we also have to acknowledge that it isn't that easy for everyone. So it's not true for everyone that veganism is easy. It does not pay attention to the many oppressed or marginalized groups who do not have easy access to fresh food, to vegan products and services. For example, people who are institutionalized, who are in a care facility, who are in hospital, or who depend on others for living, for shopping, for food. People who depend on ready-made meals, people who need tube feeding. Those are just a couple of examples. Health shaming in the movement. Unfortunately, I see a lot of health shaming in parts of our movement. So health shaming is shaming people about their health status. Veganism is often presented as a miracle cure for all health problems. This is especially coming from so-called health vegans who like to present a plant-based diet as a magical bullet for just about any disease or condition. So it's like, yeah, go vegan and all your health problems will be solved. And if it is not cured by turning vegan, it must be because you're not eating the right kind of plant-based diet. So basically, one is shaming people about their health status and shaming people about their food choices as well. Shaming is not only ineffective to bring about lifestyle changes, but it can also have the adverse effect, and it is simply wrong. So this slide shows an image with two panels. On the left with grayish colors, a rather doom sphere. There's a store that says pharmacy on top with drugs in big letters underneath. We see a fat person in a wheelchair, other fat persons walking on the pavement, and I come to body shaming in a moment. Police holding down a person, skyscrapers in the background. And it contrasts with the image on the right, a scene with bright colors, a store that says organics, all natural, and a happy stereotypical family, grass and trees in the background, people playing in the background. So yes, I know diet is an important factor for one's health, but there are many other factors that also determine one's health, not only diet, but also lifestyle, environmental factors, think of air pollution, water pollution, radiation, and genetics play a role. And often there's no one-to-one link between any of these and health status. Now, I'm not denying that a vegan diet, and certainly a whole foods plant-based diet, is generally beneficial to one's health, and it can reduce the risk for many chronic conditions and illnesses. So as it says on the slide, overall vegans are less likely to have type 2 diabetes, have hypertension, and to develop certain cancers. But a vegan diet is no guarantee for good health. Even vegans can get cancer. Even vegans die. Sometimes there is also damage because of a chronic or progressive disease that cannot be reversed with a vegan diet. A whole foods plant-based diet greatly reduces the risk for many diseases and conditions, and it can stabilize certain conditions, but it is no magical bullet. So the slide shows the cover of two books. On the left, How Not to Die, and on the right, Even Vegans Die. The book on the right was from Carol Adams, Patty Brightman, and Virginia Messina. And on the left, How Not to Die is the well-known book by Dr. Michael Greger. So chronic health shaming has proven to work counterproductive, even possibly leading to depression, weight gain, and also addiction. So it can actually make people's health worse rather than motivate them to live a better lifestyle. There's also the idea that chronically ill vegans are not good vegans, not good enough to stand on the barricades for veganism. If you don't fulfill the stereotypical image of beauty, of being young and healthy, you could scare people away, you know. You are not a good ambassador for veganism. And this was some other examples of related to health shaming. So the image about a cardiologist says, the text reads, non-vegan to vegan, my cardiologist told me I need to eat meat. The vegan replies, I don't need a cardiologist. Well, that one really hits also to me because like a couple of weeks ago, I was in the ER with heart problems and I really needed a cardiologist. And on the right, there's a text, a meme with some silhouettes of animals in the middle, and the text reads, heart attacks are God's revenge for eating his little animal friends. Now about the use of medication, I already talked about it. I'm going to recap briefly. So there's also medication shaming in the vegan movement, but some vegans do need to take medication. I've taken medication, otherwise I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have reached this age. So again, I refer to the definition of veganism, which includes as far as is possible and practicable. And as I explained before, all medical knowledge is based on unethical procedures and testing that has occurred on humans and animals. We cannot undo that body of knowledge, and taking or not taking medication will not influence the demand for animal testing and is required by law for all medication. And as such, there are no alternatives as there are, for example, for cosmetics. So please focus on changing the legislation and developing alternatives, not on shaming people who take medication. The slide shows on the left an image with a basket of fruits and veggies and with the text, medicine is not healthcare, food is healthcare, medicine is sick care. It's time we see it for what it is. And on the right, it shows an image of a food stall in a pasture with fresh veggies and fruits with the letters pharmacy on top. This slide shows another example. This is a cartoon with two ticket booths at the back. On the left, it says pills and surgery, where a whole line of people are queuing. And on the right, it says lifestyle change with nobody queuing up. I've seen this one shared in the vegan community quite a lot. Now about body shaming, I mentioned it before. I see a lot of body shaming as well, unfortunately, in the vegan community. It often comes down to fat shaming, shaming people for being fat, or often implicitly claiming that some people are not good advocates for animals based on their appearance, favoring the images of young, attractive, able-bodied persons to get a bigger reach. Now, there are so many examples of body shaming in the movement. I've included a couple of them here on the slides. So mostly the images are portraying non-vegans as fat people, as lazy people. So the slide shows several examples. And here on this slides as well, several examples of mostly it's vegans as thin people and the non-vegans as fat people. So yes, on average, vegans do have a lower BMI, but that's just on average. And BMI, I know there's a lot to be said about that. That's really not a good indicator of health, but it is still used a lot in the medical community. But that does not mean that all vegans are thin and that all non-vegans are fat. Vegans and non-vegans come in all sizes and shapes. And a vegan diet is also no guarantee for weight loss. So because of my diseases, I told you I have Crohn's disease and ankylosing spondylitis. And because of Crohn's disease, especially, my weight has yo-yoed up and down over the past 30 years. So sometimes it goes up 20 kilos and then it goes down 15 kilos. So I've had all kinds of weights in the last 30 years. And I have experienced firsthand how reactions are different to a thin body and to a fat body in society. Body shaming marginalizes fat people. It makes them feel unwelcome. It is also not effective and even counterproductive. So please focus on the animal rights issue in your activism and not on singling out people because of their appearance. About ableist language. The slide shows a screenshot of a Facebook post in the group Vegan Humor that says, "Vegan, why aren't you vegan yet?" So the vegan says, "Why aren't you vegan yet?" And the reply, meatards reply, "Me, myself, my fingers, my plate." And I have added text here on the screenshot that this is ableism in the vegan movement. So there's also the frequent use of ableist language in the vegan movement. For example, using mental illness diagnosis to refer to people who use or abuse animals, using words associated with disability as an insult, as something bad. Other examples are retarded, lame, insane, idiot, loony, she's so autistic, crippled, spaz. And there are so many alternatives that can be used for instead of ableist language. This slide shows some alternatives. For example, use unreal instead of insane. Use awful instead of stupid. Use language that is respectful to disabled people. About microaggressions, the sort of little jokes that disabled people or chronically ill people often hear. On the left of this slide, it shows a cartoon of a person holding up a sign that reads, "Oh, you have a mental disability? You seem perfectly normal to me." So as an example of microaggressions. And on the right, it shows a drawing of a person in a wheelchair seen from the back with dozens of text balloons with microaggressions. Examples, I'm going to read some, I'm not going to read all of them, are, "Oh, you poor thing," or "Everything happens for a reason." And this one, I've also had this one. "Is someone here with you? Why are you alone?" Or another one that I find really irritating. "At least you don't have," and sometimes it's like, for example, "Well, at least you don't have cancer," you know, minimizing your condition. Or another one is, but you can walk, right? So you don't really need the wheelchair. So those are all examples of microaggressions. This slide shows a screenshot of a post I did on Crip Humanimal with the title, "Are Disabled Animals Fetishized in Social Media?" with a photo of a small terrier dog with their back legs strapped in a pink wheelchair or a sort of rollator carriage. So this is about the videos of disabled animals doing the rounds on social media. They are seen as so cute, but often also as so inspiring, you know, the inspiring disabled animals. It should also be noted that the number of stories of disabled animals pales in comparison to the number of disabled animals who do not end up in a cute video, as most disabled animals end up killed at birth or in shelters or in other circumstances. I often feel that such inspirational stories from disabled animals are more about making us humans feel good. They are used as inspiration porn and sometimes also have more to do with saviorism, human saviorism, centering the human savior than focused on the animals themselves. Sorry. One can as such pose the question whether disabled animals are fetishized on social media. Yes, on the one hand, these videos provide a way for non-disabled people to talk about and to engage with disability in an easy way. I acknowledge that. But on the other hand, they are used as inspiration porn, entailing the objectification of disabled bodies for the person of inspiring able-bodied people. And I want to note also, it's also remarkable that in vegan and animal rights spaces, that compassion and respect towards disabled animals often does not extend to disabled humans. This was an example about, maybe you all remember who this was. This was so-called Grumpy Cat. I will skip the slide. Another example of ableism in our movement, and is a pretty obvious one, is accessibility. So the slide shows a digital image of a drawing doll in a wheelchair looking at the staircase. On the right, a photo of a sign at an entrance and the sign says, "There's a wheelchair ramp available. Please ask at the counter." But of course, to get at the counter, one first needs the wheelchair ramp. So about the accessibility, or rather the non-accessibility of events, demos, actions, meetings, festivals, websites. Accessibility is, of course, not just about wheelchair accessibility, mobility accessibility, but also about providing image descriptions, subtitles, transcripts, closed captions, and so forth. So with regards to the format of the media, be aware that not everyone can listen to podcasts, can actually see blogs, can see photos. Just as important, I think, even if your event is not accessible or not completely accessible, please provide information about the accessibility of an event or a location. Don't have the idea, oh, we'll just wait and see if somebody asks information about being accessible, and then we'll think about how to deal with it. That's ableist, and that really frustrates me. If I see an announcement of an event and I see there's no information there about accessibility, and I have to ask again, it already, I don't have any, I'm not eager anymore to go anymore, because I already think it's not going to be accessible. They won't have thought about it. This next slide shows an image by Tyler Feder depicting a variety of people. It's a drawing, abled and disabled, people of color, young and old, wearing different clothes and so forth, with the text, "You already have a beach body." So I want to note this is about inclusiveness and representation. Inclusiveness is more than just diversity. It's not because some persons with a disability participate in an event or are a member of an organization that the event or organization is truly diverse or inclusive. Don't use people with disabilities as tokens in campaigns. So there are many more examples to give of ableism in the movement. Some other things, maybe not really ableism, but have to do with health shaming, or health is like, for example, the pseudoscientific health advice that I see doing the rounds in the vegan community, you know, the coconut oil cures everything. And another thing that I find is really, really counterproductive and really not ethical as well. Wishing bad health to non-vegans, for example, when you see an example of somebody who was really, really ill from food poisoning, from eating animal products, celebrating their death or celebrating their illness for, oh yeah, good on them and it's karma. I think that really won't draw people to veganism or make them more open to veganism. And it's also, I think it's not ethical. So I will stop the slides. And I conclude, I will round up. I see it's only about 10 minutes anymore. So you might be wondering, some animal rights activists might be wondering, why am I talking about accessibility, health shaming, body shaming, ableist language, and all those examples at an event of an animal rights organization? Because I know many will think that it is a long stretch away from the focus of animal rights. And many think, I know, that our movement is only and only about tackling speciesism and about the animals. And I've had people come up to me after I gave a similar talk at a conference and say that all this talk about ableism or other forms of oppression and discrimination, that is just distracting away from the animals. We should focus on the animals and nothing else. Now, my reply to that is, first of all, how we deal with each other as humans, how we organize ourselves as a society, as a movement, will of course have repercussions on how we deal with other animals. So first of all, it's a matter of effectiveness, but not only that. I will come to the second point in a moment. But first of all, it's a matter of effectiveness. So being chronically ill myself, I have never felt comfortable about opening up about my diseases in the vegan or animal rights community. It's only been since a couple of years that I have actually opened up about it. Like say 10 years ago, I would have never talked about being diagnosed with Crohn's disease and ankylosing spondylitis this openly. Partly because of internalized ableism of myself, also because of institutionalized ableism in society, jeopardizing my professional career, but also because of ableism in the vegan movement. And I know from fellow vegans who are chronically ill that they have similar feelings because of the health shaming, the medication shaming, the pseudoscientific health advice in the vegan and animal rights community. If we make a whole group of people not feel welcome in our movement or even actively discriminate against them, we're shutting out a whole group of people who would otherwise also advocate for animal rights and tackle speciesism, people who we also need to become vegan. And we are also marginalizing vegans who have disabilities, disabled vegans within our movement. So that's the first point. It's a matter of effectiveness. The larger our movement can become, the more efficiently and effectively we can fight speciesism, and we can build bridges with other social justice movements. So, but secondly, of course, it's not only a matter of effectiveness. That's just the pragmatic side of it. So secondly, it's a matter of justice. And justice for me, it's indivisible. No, you cannot divide it into separate parts, because all the different isms like racism, sexism, speciesism, and also ableism, they are connected in the system of oppression. These oppressions are not only connected, and sometimes they intersect, but they operate in the same way and they use the same tactics of objectification, animalization, devaluation for othering people of color, women, animals, disabled people, and other oppressed groups. They are all connected in a system of oppression. They don't just operate independently from each other. What is the source of this system of oppression? For me, it's a mixture of capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy, a combination of all of these reinforcing one another. So activism should not only be about changing individual behavior, but dismantling the system of oppression. That includes being aware of the connections between the different isms, Tackling just one of these oppressions, for example, speciesism, without taking into account the other oppressions, while colluding with the system, will not work. Think of how the animal industrial complex not only exploits and oppresses animals in very large numbers, we all know the domains, but it also exploits the workers in the fields, the workers in the slaughterhouses, often immigrant workers doing low-paid hazardous works. Those individuals are not our enemy, the system is. So all of these issues need to be addressed. That is also one of the reasons why I launched the platform Cripium Animal. So I do interviews with disabled and chronically ill vegans in which they talk about their activism, their journey to veganism, the challenges they face, and so hopefully they can be inspiring for other disabled people to transition to veganism. And so hopefully, I would hope that if there are other disabled vegans who want to do an interview, please contact me. On Cripium Animal, I also explore the interconnectedness between ableism and speciesism, animality and disability by sharing resources, highlighting the stories of disabled vegans and also disabled animals. One of those issues is, for example, how the animalization of disabled people has served and still serves as a tool in their oppression. I also address topics like health shaming and body shaming, as I mentioned in this presentation. So to round up, this is a concluding part. I fully understand the concerns by disabled and chronically ill persons about being met with ableism from the vegan community. But that behavior, those ableist remarks, projects, platforms should be distinguished from the overall philosophy of veganism, which is in and by itself absolutely not ableist. And although there are certainly problematic sections within the vegan movement, like in any other movement for social justice, I would say, I can also say that a large segment of the movement is really advocating for inclusion of all and for total liberation. But I should also note that dismantling ableism is not only a matter of becoming more diverse and inclusive in our movement. As a social justice movement, we should be working for liberation and justice for all, and ableism must be flat out condemned. And there's still so much work to be done there. So those were my thoughts about veganism and ableism. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can reach me via cripiumanimal.org or send me a message through Facebook or Instagram. And I'm sorry I've taken so long. I thought there would be more time left to ask questions. So there's maybe a couple of minutes left. But anyway, thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Trudy. People are giving you applause. I'm not sure if you can see everyone, but they are giving you applause. That was a phenomenal presentation. In fact, I called one of our board members who wasn't here, who marked going. I was like, you need to come here. This is good stuff. You're missing out.
Thanks.
But yes, if you want, we can give you a few extra minutes for Q&A. And this often happens at our events. We just push things back a little. Do you want to have a hard stop in like 4 or 5 minutes, or do you want to do a little more Q&A than that?
You call the shots. If somebody has a question, I'm open. There's still a couple of minutes left.
Absolutely. In that case, I would like to refer one question I saw earlier on, and to me, it is a very interesting topic for discussion. And many people have conflicting views on it, namely, what do you make of service dogs?
Oh, yes.
That question.
Yeah, that's a very, very thorny issue. And I don't think I can answer that in a couple of minutes, because the nuance will be left out. Of course, from an animal rights perspective, we condemn the use, or we try to avoid the use of animals to work for humans. But the claim is that that is ableist because they say some disabled people use service dogs or service animals. I can understand both perspectives, on the one hand, the speciesism, on the other hand, the ableism. If I have to say it in a couple of sentences, like, for example, a couple of years ago, there was a post by, I think it was Anonymous for the Voiceless. Yeah, I think it was from Anonymous for the Voiceless, not surprisingly, who wrote a whole post about service dogs, and this is speciesist, and we have to end this, and really focusing on disabled persons, bad persons, and you have to stop using service dogs. That's not the way to go, you know. I would like to come to a situation, to a society where the need for service dogs is no longer, where it's not longer needed anymore, where society is so accessible for everyone that we don't need to use animals, that disabled persons don't need to use animals to live in society. But that is not the case at this moment. So let's please, as an animal rights community, as a vegan community, focus on making everything as accessible as possible. Put your energy towards that and not shaming disabled people for using service dogs. You know, as I said, I understand both perspectives, and I would like to come to a situation where service dogs are no longer needed. But that's not the way, that's not the society we are living in at this day. There's also a lot to be said about how service dogs, service animals are trained, but that's more of a welfarist issue. So that's not the same as an animal rights view on it. From an animal rights perspective, we would like to see an end of that. And there's also a difference, that's a concluding sentence. There's also a difference with, for example, a dog who you have adopted, who lives with you together in the family, who will assist you in your day-to-day life. And on the other hand, dogs who are bred and who are raised and who are trained specifically to become service dogs. Then you have the additional problems of animals not fulfilling the requirements, not being good enough service dogs, who end up being killed because they don't meet the requirements. So those are a couple of thoughts. I hope that is nuanced enough, because I want it to be a nuanced discussion. It is a very nuanced discussion.
Thank you very much. And we have time for just one more quick question. So put your questions in the chat. Whoever puts theirs in first will probably get to go and be the last question answered and have their question answered. Oh, people are asking about access to your slide deck. Are you comfortable sharing your slide deck after this presentation?
Oh yes, yeah. Maybe you can include it in the recording, or maybe I should. I've already emailed to you, so if people email you, you can forward it to them.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. I can definitely make that happen. I already have your slides uploaded to Google Drive, so I just have to link to them. And now let's see, let's try to fit in just one more question real quick. Do you think there are a large number of vegans who do understand these nuances, such as medical shaming, but who are still guilty of posting blatant statements / means that, divorced from context, do a lot of harm? What would you say to them?
Well, yes, yes, there are unfortunately still a large number of vegans who do not understand these nuances, or maybe don't even want to understand them. That's one of the reasons why I started Crip Humanimal, why I do presentations like this, to get the word out, hopefully to get a better understanding of these issues. And I hope, yeah, this is my small contribution, and hoping to getting a better understanding of all of these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Trudy. Everyone, give Trudy a round of applause.
Thank you.
That was terrifically insightful. Thank you so much, Trudy. And we have yet another terrifically insightful individual to share with you. Their name is Patrice, and I would like you to please welcome Patrice Jones to the stage. Patrice is a co-founder of Vine Sanctuary, a farmed animal sanctuary that was founded by people with disabilities. Patrice's new book, Bird's Eye View: Queer Queries about Activism, Animals, and Identity, includes numerous essays about the intersections between ableism and speciesism. Patrice will deliver an insightful presentation titled Veganism and Disability Rights. What's the connection? Without further ado, here's Patrice. And Patrice, I'm going to add you as a co-host. I forgot to do that. One moment. And you are now a co-host. So you should be able to share your screen and unmute yourself.
Wonderful. Hello. Thank you, Trudy, for that super presentation. Hello, everybody. I see a few people I know and some people I don't know, but I don't see enough people. So if you feel comfortable, I don't want anybody to feel obliged to turn their camera on, but the way that my brain works, it's pretty hard for me to talk to black boxes, and a lot easier for me to talk when I can actually see the people with whom I am attempting to communicate. So if you feel comfortable, I would love it if you would turn on your camera. And thank you very much to those who have already done so. It's very, very helpful to me. Speaking of books, before I jump in, so Kyle mentioned my new book, Bird's Eye Views, which is published by Vine Press. Proceeds support the sanctuary, and which does include several essays, including one that's not previously been published in English, specifically about the speciesism and ableism intersection. I should also mention that my book, The Oxen at the Intersection, A Collision, which is published by Lantern, which tells the story of a failed effort to rescue two oxen who were scheduled for slaughter, specifically because one had become disabled, includes what I think is a really accessible chapter, not only about how ableism actually hurt animals in that particular case, but a very basic ABC overview of what the intersections between ableism and speciesism are. And that goes into more details than I'm going to be able to go into today. So I'll recommend you to that. Again, that's The Oxen at the Intersection. So I am Patrice Jones, and I am a co-founder of Vine Sanctuary, which is located in the part of the world now known as Vermont in the USA, which is the traditional homeland of the Abenaki people, as well as the co-creation of beavers and turkeys and other animals who were co-creating these forests long before humans in our modern configuration even existed. More than 500 animals live here at the sanctuary, which is, as most people know, led by LGBTQ folk. But what fewer people know, because we as well were slow to disclose this about ourselves, is that there would be no Vine Sanctuary were it not for the disability rights movement. Co-founder Miriam Jones and I are both people with disabilities, and the preponderance of our staff are people with disabilities, as well as many of our volunteers. But the sanctuary wouldn't exist if it weren't for the disability rights movement, because Miriam and I met in the course of a struggle for housing rights for people with disabilities. She and I are both, were both decades-long social justice activists before we started the sanctuary. And we learned so much in many different movements, including the disability rights movement. Another disability spin for the sanctuary is, of course, that many of our non-human community members are also disabled. And in fact, right now we're working on the project of rebuilding a cart that had been used by a former resident who is a disabled sheep for another disabled sheep who is a different size. So we're figuring out how to reconfigure that. We sorry, we will be doing our second annual month of Disability Pride Month events this July. Last July, that included a Disabled Vegan Speak Out and a book about reading a book for book club that had a disability link, and several other events. So please do visit vinesanctuary.org, sign up for our newsletter, or follow us on Facebook so that you're notified when we announce the slate of disability-related events for July. Right now, what we're working on, and which is actually going to be the basis of what I'm going to talk about today, is a briefing for the movement on the intersections and what the movement will need to do differently and better if we're going to take advantage of the opportunities that are there for us to advocate for animals more effectively and work for a world in which self-determination and freedom are the norm for everybody. So regardless of the title that I gave Kyle, what I'm actually going to talk about today are some of the elements of this briefing paper that we're preparing, which is going to be distributed to movement leaders around the country and around the world, as well as to grassroots groups. And so what I'm going to talk about are what are some of the opportunities that currently exist but are not being seized by the vegan and animal rights movements with regard to disability? What are some of the roadblocks that are preventing us from doing what we could and should be doing? And then what can we do, particularly since folks are individuals? I'll talk about what we can do as individuals. The briefing paper actually has 3 levels: what the movement can do, 4 levels: what the movement can do, what organizations that have paid staff can do, what grassroots organizations can do, and what individuals can do. I should say that this briefing is right at very near the point where we're going to be needing feedback from some other disabled vegans before we finalize and circulate it. So if you're someone who might be willing to volunteer in that capacity, reading the rough draft and giving input, then please do contact me, which you can always do by going to the Vine Sanctuary website and hitting contact us, because I get those emails, or you can reach out to me on social media. We also need volunteers for all of our disability-related initiatives. Okay, so what are some missed opportunities? Well, first of all, people with and I apologize, I got here late because of something that turned up here at the sanctuary, so I didn't hear all of the first talk. So I'm really apologizing if I repeat things that have already been said. But here in the United States, about 25% or more of people are people with disabilities, and that's probably going to be growing thanks to COVID and long COVID. And yet, not only does the vegan movement make no particular effort to promote veganism in communities of people with disabilities, but as has already been said, and I'm going to say as well, much vegan messaging is inadvertently ableist and therefore off-putting. So we've got 25% of the population who are not yet, among whom are many not yet vegans. That's an opportunity. Next, as the previous speaker said, there are so many intersections between ableism and speciesism. Speciesism is ableism is foundational to speciesism and vice versa. Animals and people with disabilities have been subjected to, and in many cases continue to be subjected to, many of the same injuries, including lifetime incarceration, forced sterilization, being forced to work for no pay or without pay, being treated like your language is not language. And more. And these injuries are rationalized by the same ideologies. For some, it's God said so. God made animals for humans to use, and there are people who believe that disabilities are the sign of a mark of God's disfavor. But more commonly, the rationalization for human supremacy resides or rests upon the idea that there is some capability that humans have that other animals don't have. It might be consciousness, it might be memory, it might be tool use, it might be language, it might be some combination of all of those, it might be sense of self. And of course, all sorts of people in the sciences and in animal activism have gone out of their way to demonstrate that in fact these capabilities are not uniquely held by humans, that in fact many, if not all, non-human animals are conscious, are sentient, are capable of communication, have memory, and that some use language, and that some even have capabilities we don't have, like sonar or echolocation. But that's beside the point of the gist of the problem, which is that the idea here is that the worth of an individual, the moral worth of a being, the right of a being to live their lives free of exploitation and make their own decisions and not be impressed into servitude, is based on ability. That's ableism. In this regard, it's not just that speciesism and ableism are similar or have similar roots. At this very central point, ableism and speciesism are the same thing. This being the case, with the very notion of human being defined in many cases by abilities, opens up a vast array of opportunities for cross-movement solidarity, for cross-movement initiatives and coalitions. We could do all sorts of amazing things together if the disability rights and animal rights movements got together. But we can't yet, because of the roadblocks I'm going to be talking about. And then finally, I'm still on opportunities here. Haven't got to roadblocks yet. There are lessons to be learned by the animal rights movement, by the vegan movement, from the disability rights movement. Look, here in the United States, the disability rights movement is one of the most, if not the most, materially successful social movements in the modern era. And I'll bet that if you're a person here in the United States, you know a little bit, at least a little bit, about the civil rights movement. You know a little bit about the sit-ins. You know who MLK was. You've probably heard of Rosa Parks. Can you name the folks who played similarly prominent roles in the disability rights movement? Can you, you've probably heard about the march on the Selma March. You've heard about the March on Washington. Can you name some of the key moments in disability rights history? If not, then there are lessons to be learned. How did this movement of folks who were profoundly disadvantaged by the current state of by the state of affairs at the time manage to organize such a powerful national movement, leading to so many material changes that were fought back against by people who didn't want them? How did they do that? We could learn from that, because we've got an uphill battle as vegans and animal rights activists. So those are opportunities. Whole bunch of people who are not yet vegan, whole bunch of opportunities for coalitions and cross-movement solidarity, and a whole bunch of lessons to be learned. What are the roadblocks? Well, ableism among vegans, both conscious ableism and implicit ableism. You probably don't need me to give examples of that, especially since after the last talk. But it's important to be aware of the degree to which really common vegan messaging is either explicitly or implicitly ableist. And I want to draw a strong, or I have big arrows on my paper pointing also to fake health claims or exaggerated health claims for veganism, because this is super common and really, really, really off-putting. Ableism in AR messaging is one thing I wrote. So if you're arguing that pigs shouldn't be eaten because they have particular cognitive capabilities, what are you saying, really? I mean, I know consciously what you're saying is don't eat pigs because they're persons. But aren't you saying also that certain cognitive capabilities is what makes you a person? And how is that going to sound to people who are not neurotypical, to people who have family members who are who have developmental disabilities? Are you saying that they could be eaten? Peter Singer seemed to sometimes say that. So I don't know how much people are aware of this, but I'm getting to the next roadblock. So we've got ableism in AR messaging, and it's really common and often not intended to be what it is. An antidote to this, by the way, is you certainly can point out the lies about animals that are told. There's no reason not to say that pigs can think in this way or that way. It's just a matter of not suggesting that it's this or that capability that is what makes a person, or that makes a person worthy of moral consideration. And you also, it goes hand in hand with, you also don't want to be suggesting that the closer somebody is to human, that's what makes them worthy. And so apart from ableism, it gets tricky when we're constantly arguing, oh, they're like us in this way, they're like us in that way, they're like us in this other way. And so anything that you can do to sort of balance that out by sort of talking about the diversity of ways that animals exist in the world and co-create habitats together, and see colors that we can't see, can be used to wobble this idea that a particular set of abilities are what makes somebody matter. So next I have anti-animal rights or vegan sentiments in disability rights communities. We can thank Peter Singer for that. And we can thank other more or less explicitly ableist animal advocates for that. But it's important for us to know, because Peter Singer over the years has, in a way that I'm sure he thinks is, I don't know what, intellectually provocative or something or other, has said so many horrifying things about people with developmental disabilities, and newborns with disabilities, and whether or not they deserve to live, that any animal rights activist who ever quotes Peter Singer on a poster or a meme or anything is committing a microaggression against people with disabilities. You need to be clear about that. There can be no quoting of Peter Singer, no matter what he said. Find somebody else who said it. I just want you, like, I read a wonderful anthology called Disability Visibility, which is voices of people with disabilities. Very first chapter is about Peter Singer and the dumbass things he has said. I mean, people don't think this is hidden away, and people don't know it. People know it. People in the disability rights movement know it. Disability rights activists presume that many disability rights activists presume that animal rights activists think like Peter Singer. And this leads, of course, to a fair amount of hostility. And then I would say, I'm still on roadblocks here. Sorry, that's the downside of the talk. That the vegan and animal rights movements have really made no particular effort at all to be fair with regard to disability, to enable the promotion of veganism within communities, within disabled communities. Notice the way I say that, enable because I don't want non-disabled vegans like going in and trying to, but there would be ways to facilitate this by funding things like the project that we heard about from the previous speaker. And this gets reflected in many different ways: inaccessible venues for events, the microaggressions of various sorts, not limited to quoting Peter Singer, tokenism, finding visibly finding one or two visibly disabled people to get up on the stage and say something carefully scripted, but not inviting them to really assist in decision making, set the tone for the movement or the organization. So those are the roadblocks. So what can we do? Well, here's where things are lucky, because the disability rights movement is so powerful. There are so many resources that already exist that help organizations to know how to put on accessible events, make your website accessible. By the way, that's something we're working on. There are all sorts of guidelines that are easily findable and that people should be following. And this is true for grassroots organizations as well as for organizations with staff. A quick rule of thumb, if you're a grassroots organization, is just ask yourself, okay, so what's the percentage roughly of people with disabilities in our group? Is it roughly a fourth? If not, then what's wrong? Is it that there are people with disabilities, but they're not coming out as such? And what's maybe preventing them from coming out as such? Or is it that your organization has made itself inaccessible to people with disabilities in ways that you don't even realize because you never explicitly thought about it before? So now it's time to explicitly think about it. It's time to have a meeting and say, what are we doing wrong? Or what is it that we're just not doing that we need? What are we neglecting to do? Or what are we doing wrong? In what way are we setting ourselves up that people with disabilities who care about animals are not joining? And this is the same thing you would do if you were I don't know, if you were in Baltimore, which is a Black majority city, and you looked around the room and saw that everybody was white, you'd have to be like, what are we doing wrong? So that's something that anybody can do if they're involved in any organization, is provoke those kinds of conversations within your organization. Now, that might be difficult if you're a staff member, especially an entry-level staff member at an organization where you're an employee and your livelihood relies on this. So of course we do need organizations that have staff to be following not just the Equal Opportunity Law Act or whatever is appropriate in your country, laws about fair hiring for people with disabilities, but need to be affirmatively attempting to engage in best practices with regard to inclusion of not only people with disabilities, but people from any marginalized group. And this is one reason we're preparing this briefing, because we know that employees who want their organizations to be better may not feel empowered to make that demand themselves. So Vine's going to make that demand, and that we're hoping that will help. But some of these best practices include inclusion at all levels, and so that means not just hiring people with disabilities or including people with disabilities in your organization, but making sure that they're in decision-making roles. Or if you don't have decision-making roles, part of the conversation when you're setting priorities, helping to plan the event, rather than coming in afterwards and being asked, oh, is this accessible enough? Hope that makes sense. And then learn from the disability rights movement. I want to highlight two, and I'm leaving lots of time for questions and answers. So I want to highlight two key principles from disability rights that I believe will help animal rights organizations and vegan organizations not only do better with regard to disability, and not only do better with regard to social justice more broadly, but actually serve animals better. First is the phrase, nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. Now, people with disabilities, particularly those who have been institutionalized or otherwise robbed of some level of self-determination, came up with that phrase. But what it means is don't be making decisions about people with disabilities if people with disabilities aren't in the room helping to make those decisions. Nothing about us without us. So this is an essential principle for anybody who is advocating for anybody. In the animal rights movement, we have a real need to think about what nothing about us without us looks like for us. Here we are claiming to represent the interests of non-human animals. Some people even running around claiming that they're the voices of non-human animals, when in fact non-human animals have their own voices and use them pretty well. So really learning and thinking about this key principle, nothing about us without us, could, within the animal rights movement, provoke us to be much more circumspect, much less hubristic, much more thoughtful about how to figure out what animals, not animals, because animals, that's too broad, what particular sets of animals might like us to be doing on their behalf. And why I say animals is too broad is because you know what? The interest of frogs right now are really different than the interest of cows. Cows are caught up in captivity and used and killed within the animal industrial complex. They, for the most part, enjoy no legal freedom, and with the exception of small numbers at sanctuaries, very little actual freedom in practice, right? Frogs are mostly free, but they are experiencing extinction level threats due to climate change and pollution. So I'm sorry if that took us off on a track, but it's good to remember that different people with disabilities also have different interests. So if we think nothing about us without us, I think that makes us think much more carefully about what animals might want. It makes us much more likely to really question ourselves and our strategies and our goals and even the structure of what we're trying to do. If we ask ourselves, well, we can't bring frogs in to the meeting room, but how could we virtually bring them into the meeting room? so that we, by the way, I'm thinking of frogs because I'm working on a project involving frogs, and toads, and getting smashed by cars when they hop over roads. We can't bring them into the room with us, but we can make an imaginative effort to include them. And I think we can learn from the disability rights movement about how to do that. Another super important concept from the disability rights movement is, or not just concept, but value, is interdependence, right? So one of the many disadvantages that harm people with disabilities is this idea that to be dependent in any way on others is shameful, is weak, makes you less of a person. And the opposite of dependence is this idea of independence, where you are an individual, you're the main character of the story, everybody else is background. So, and independence, this idea of independence, it's not just toxic in the ways that it harms people with disabilities who have to depend on others. It's toxic with regard to the larger than human world, including animals, right? This idea that humans are independent, that's some defining characteristic of humans, are independent. It's nonsensical. Take a breath. Now say thank you to algae and trees, because without them, there wouldn't have been any oxygen in that air. You're absolutely dependent on them every single day, every instant of every day. You depend on algae and trees for the air you breathe. You depend on underground networks of insects you don't even know the name for to create the soil in which those trees grow. You're dependent on the world of plants who magically, it seems like magic to us, right, transmorgifies sunshine into calories for you to eat. You can't photosynthesize. You're not going to have anything to eat without them. You need them. You depend on them, right? And so the human idea of independence from the larger than human world is dangerous. It's what's led us here to climate change and pollution and water crises and everything that is menacing not only us, but every animal on Earth. This toxic idea of independence. The disability rights movement teaches us about interdependence. The disability rights movement holds that as perhaps the highest value, that we depend on each other. There is no shame in depending on others. In fact, we all are dependent on others. And since we all are dependent on others, then we all also have obligations to support others as best we can. So I think that taking up this beautiful value from the disability rights movement and really taking it in can lead to a much deeper awareness of and respect for the larger than human world, including other animals. And so will be absolutely foundational to creating the change we need to create in the world, in the way, and not in the world, in the human world, in the ways that humans think, and the ways that humans feel, and the ways that humans consequently behave. So even though I see all sorts of roadblocks, I'm really heartened. I'm heartened by the existence of this event today. I'm heartened by the number of people who came out on a Saturday, and today for us, it's like a sunny day after a dreadful snowfall. So, you know, people want to be outside, not on Zoom. But here you are on Zoom on a Saturday afternoon to learn about this. That's really heartening for me. And I think that the animal rights movement and the vegan movement can learn from the disability rights movements, can adjust our collective behavior in such a way as to actually make it possible for extraordinarily fruitful cross-movement coalitions and collaborations to go on. So that's what I had to say today. Again, Vine Sanctuary is working on all sorts of things with regard to that. We'd love to have you as a volunteer. You can reach us by going to vinesanctuary.org. Thank you, Kyle, for organizing this event. And I've left, I think, plenty of time for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Patrice. You are a dynamic speaker as always, and I too am heartened. This event to me is a dream come true, and I'm glad that at our peak, 44 people were watching this all at once, and we've probably had over 50 people jump on and off throughout the presentation so far. And I would say that yeah, I'm entirely heartened too. Because of the incredible work that you're doing at the intersection of disability rights and the animal rights movement. That resource that you were preparing for organizations, be they grassroots or be they professional advocacy organizations, I think will be very impactful. And I don't always know what to do to advance disability rights. I just knew that if we brought together people with great ideas and the people who care about them, something good would happen, and you're making it happen. So everyone, please help Patrice with her projects. These are very valuable ways to make a real difference in the movement. So thank you, Patrice. Okay, it looks like we have some questions in the chat, and yes, we do have a good amount of time for Q&A. The first question is from Andira Loesch. How do we move from an individualist marketing narrative of veganism to an integrated, inclusive, interdependent form of solidarity?
Ooh. You can't make it so that people can say their questions, can you?
Oh, I can do that. Andira, here, let me find you and I will unmute you. Actually, for just this section, I'm going to allow people to mute. 1 second. Allow participants to unmute themselves. So yeah, feel free to jump in. I know we have some questions started. If you're one of the people who already put a question in the chat, just jump in at an appropriate time and we'll go from there.
Okay, so Andira, I want to hear more about what you're asking.
Sure, I'm here. So I'm curious your thoughts on the process of how we change this awareness, this like way that veganism is viewed in the culture, how we challenge that narrative about veganism just being about individual consumer choices rather than being about an expansive appreciation of ecosystems and interdependence and of actually caring about the world and seeing ourselves as part of nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a long process and a tricky process because, how can I say this? So we've got stereotypes about veganism, but we also have a number of vegans who do in fact live up to or down to those stereotypes. And so there's sort of two different or two combined things that have to happen. One is for those of us who have a different way of practicing veganism within a wider, as part of a wider set of commitments to be as visible as we can be. Not in a drawing a lot of attention to yourself way, but I know so many vegans who are also active in social justice movements. And there are ways to sort of signal that you're vegan without like making it your whole identity. Because also that's something that people need to learn. People in the wider world need to learn that you can just be vegan and go about your life without becoming a vegan TM professional vegan. Vegan, like for me, it's not an identity for me. I mean, I know for many people who are vegan, vegan is an identity. It's not for me. For me, it's more of a verb than a noun or an adjective. I don't know. So there are a lot of this is just basic coalition building that we should be doing anyway, right? And that's showing up for other people's events, showing up for other organizations' events, and just being vegan while you do it. Involving yourself in a broad array of activities while being visibly vegan. For example, I chair our small rural towns inclusion committee, which is an official town committee, and I'm also the chair of our library's board of trustees. And I don't mention my veganism all the time, but everybody knows I'm vegan. And Vine makes sure that if some other local organization is doing something, we show up. We write to them and say, "Are you having food? We'll bring the food." So I think there's actually a whole set of things and that can be done on that side. And I did write about that, but I can't think of the title well enough to share it. But it's about showing up for the other things you care about while also being vegan and being candid about being vegan. But just being yourself and doing those things. And then it's for organizations to make sure they be in solidarity with other movements, or not even really seeing them as other movements, allied movements. But then we also, so that's one piece of it. Those of us who are already thinking in a more expansive way need to be more visible, not allow the Instagram influencers to set the cultural narrative about what a vegan it might be. But we also have to change the cultures of veganism. We have to think about what has happened in the past, I don't know, 2 decades maybe. This buy your way to animal liberation by being vegan and buying vegan products and I can't quite describe it. It's definitely like veganism within capitalism. I guess, yes, capitalism took over veganism at some point, and it's still running the show, but we can't let it run the show. So, um, I think that there are many different ways to sort of push back against that. I'll just say this. So we at Vine we've been around since 2000, and we are a sanctuary that was founded by social justice activists. And so it was very clear to us from the inception that what we were going to have to be doing was bridge building. And what that would mean is that when we were in social justice spaces, we were going to have to be willing to sometimes create a little discomfort by talking about animals. And that when we were in vegan and animal rights spaces, we were going to have to lean on folks to pay a lot more attention to social and environmental justice questions. And so both sides of that still need to be done. And it's not a quick process, but even something as simple as, remember when I asked you to take a breath? Like that took a second, or not a second, but it took what, 30 seconds? 30 seconds for me to draw your attention to the fact that you were completely dependent on plants. There are lots of little things like that that you can do with anybody that will draw their attention to the webs of relationships in which we exist and upon which we depend. We need to be doing this anyway, right? With regard to climate change, we need to be talking about it all the time. And so it's just a matter of also not thinking, well, just because someone has quit eating animals and animal products and adopted a vegan identity, that doesn't mean that they've actually set aside their human supremacy. That doesn't mean that they're not also going to have to go through a process, if they want to, of really challenging their human supremacy. And really challenging your human supremacy leads you to a much less hubristic place. Right? I'm lucky because I did it in the context of the sanctuary. So, you know, I've had ducks talk smack about me. I've had cows roll their eyes at my incompetence. I've had many different experiences that have helped me to become a less hubristic human. But I think that the more that you can do that within your own context and then encourage your vegan friends to do the same, that helps to shift that narrative away from the consumerist, individualistic veganism.
Thank you, Patrice. There are a couple quick questions in the chat. Someone is asking, is there any way of volunteering remotely? I live in England. And then
yes. Yes. We actually have a volunteer coordinator who works with all of our remote volunteers.
Absolutely. And another question, this one might be slightly more complicated, but do you give tours at Vine Sanctuary?
We do not give tours in the sense that other sanctuaries give tours, because we respect, no disrespect to the other sanctuaries, but we have a different model, which really centers the self-determination and privacy of our non-human community members. We do think of ourselves as a multi-species community that is co-created by human and non-human community members together. So we do not feel that just bringing in randos regularly to walk around and stare at animals is consistent with that. We know we wouldn't like people walking through our bedrooms regularly. So what we do instead is this. First of all, we do welcome people who are doing work for animals, activists or scholars, because we feel that it's super important for their work to be rooted in real relationships with real animals, not abstract. And so we set up personal tours where one or two or three people, not a whole crowd, will walk around with one of us for an extensive, like 2-hour long ass tour through our whole property where we're having conversations together and they are getting to know folks. Then for the general public, what we do is we have volunteer days instead of tour days, and we only do it about 4 or 5 times a year, so it's not a burden on our non-human community members. And there what happens is anyone can come, but what they do first is they come and they immediately are put to a volunteer task. So it might be digging up thistles, it might be painting a barn, it might be shifting the compost piles, or I should say compost mountains that we have. And what happens is that as they're working, our animals come and stare at them. And they are adding their labor to the community and actually becoming part of the community. So they're not standing back and just gawping at animals, and they're also not reaching out to pet people who might not want to be petted. They're becoming part of our community while being stared at by animals. Then after that experience of being stared at by the animals, then they get to tour. So, and again, we only do it 4 or 5 times a year. And we're set up so that any animal who doesn't want to be looked at can go and hide, or just go to a different part of not hide. We don't want people needing to hide in their own home, but can go into the woods or whatever they need to do if they don't particularly feel like meeting people. We have some folks who just love meeting people. And then some folks who, given what they've endured at the hands of humans, really are not comfortable. Other sanctuaries, if there are animals who, like for example, Jan, who jumped over a beef farm fence while pregnant, and gave birth to her calf in the woods, and then found her way to a sanctuary. She was so protective of him that she couldn't live at a sanctuary where they bring people because she would charge anybody who even looked. So she came to us. And there's also Norma, who sent dairy workers to the hospital for stitches twice. She's another who we really don't want strangers just walking up to. So that's how we handle that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having those practices. Many people don't realize that many sanctuaries are somewhat problematic in how they handle interaction between human animals and their residents. So thank you, Patrice, for clarifying. And just one more thing before we move on to our next speaker. And this isn't a question so much as an offer to help. We have a comment from Roy Vanegas. He says, I'm a web developer / engineer. If you need help with accessibility for your website, I'll gladly help.
Oh, yay. Yay. We do. How can I reach you, Roy?
His email is here. I'll throw it in the chat. He already threw
Great.
it out there for everyone to see, but I'll just put it in again.
Okay, thank you. That's great. And I see that one person has their hand up.
Oh, yes. Next person, you can go. We've got time.
Okay, me, yes. My question is, how do I help to make other disability organizations that are not vegan, more vegan, because I don't really want to go there and look at all these people eating animal products and stuff like that. But I also don't want to shame anybody or feel pushy or it just really feels weird to care about one, like talk about all these like disabled rights that we're having and then sit down with people eating a bunch of like murdered animals, but I don't really want to push anybody. So how could I go about that?
Well, I think there's no one size fits all answer for that, but if you're a member of these organizations, then you've really got standing to talk to people about how you feel. And you've really got standing to, you have the opportunity to ask questions and share your feelings. Those are the two things I think are useful. One is I statements. I feel so uncomfortable when I see dead bodies. You can say that. That's not a, see, so people feel shamed when you say you statements. You need to think about this. You need to think about that. But I feel this. I feel that. I can't stop thinking about this, right? When I see a steak, I can't stop thinking about the cow and what she must have gone through. Those kinds of statements tend to be received better. I statements. But if you're a member of that group, I would think, I would identify whoever you are closest to in the group or whoever seems the most, I don't know, understanding or flexible or just friendly, and say to them, I have a hard time coming to our events because I feel this way. Can you help me figure out how to handle this?
It's less of a group, more of a full-on disability conference, but yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I see. Then I think I would, it's tricky. It's tricky. I've actually, there's actually one disability rights organization in the Bay Area that says to make an event accessible, you must serve meat. So, but presuming it's not that extreme, I think that it's a matter of talking about, first of all, that vegan food is the most accessible because everybody can eat it. So that's the first thing. The next thing is to talk about how inaccessible it is for you to have to encounter the meat. But I don't have an easy answer for this. I hope that I hope that you try and keep trying, and then let me know what worked or didn't work. I think part of that is what we're going to need to do here is those of us who are active within disability spaces to try different things and share back with each other what reactions we're getting so that we can maybe start to figure out some best practices for ourselves. That's all I can think of. I'm sorry.
Nope, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Absolutely. Everyone, please give one final round of applause to Patrice. Thank you so much, Patrice, for joining us. Illuminating as always.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Okay, we are going to move on to our final speaker for our first annual Disabled Vegan Expo, and his name is Robert Reek. Please welcome Robert Reek to the stage. Featured on the cover photo of this event, Robert describes himself as a decent human, an author, a C5 quadriplegic, and a full-time volunteer animal rights vegan activist. His speech is titled Robert A. Reek Jr., the Disabled Activist, and he is author of Spoken, a memoir sprinkled with a little quadriplegia. Robert describes himself as follows. I am of European descent. I am a C5 quadriplegic, consider myself open-minded, and love to have my perception challenged, thus improving my limited understanding, becoming more empathetic, and a step closer to all earthlings. I can relate to being an environmentalist as much as one can as an American, and I would love to be off-grid if I felt it could be done given my personal caregiving needs. Before COVID, I was an athlete playing wheelchair rugby. I can be funny, kind, and a decent human. I try to be respectful, understanding, and fair. I try to do what I believe to be the right thing and avoid using deception or dishonesty. I am a full-time animal rights vegan activist. Robert also describes his speech best. Here's an overview of his speech in his own words. My speech introduces who I am, my transition into activism, followed by stepping into animal rights activism while having a disability requiring a power wheelchair for mobility. I will be sharing details about all forms of activism I have been involved in, the effectiveness of activism, my limitations, how I involve myself, and how I empower and collaborate with others to fill in where there is clearly a challenge or limitation for me. I will stress the importance of good, meaningful communication and being genuinely inclusive to allow activism events to be organically attractive to volunteers and hopefully inspire viewers to step out of their comfort zone, be inspired to learn adaptive techniques as they make a personal commitment to be part of the animal rights vegan activism movement and their part of the world. Without further ado, here is Robert Reek, our final speaker for today. Welcome, Robert.
All right, well, thank you everyone for having me, and thanks for everyone for being here and hanging this whole time. I know it can be a long time to spend your time, valuable time, because time is a scarce resource. So I am going to screen share here real quick. I'll make sure I try to hit all the correct buttons here. Part of my disability is my hands don't work that well, so sometimes
You're fine, Robert. We still have plenty of time for your presentation. Don't worry. Okay, there you are. Now you got it.
All right. So now I'm going to go up here and put this on the bottom. I'm going to bring up the window. Some of this is going to be a little bit of repeat, I realize, but here we go. All right, so again, this is the repeat part, but this will be the only part repeated. I'm of European descent. I consider myself open-minded, love to have my perception challenged, thus improving my limited understanding, becoming more empathetic, step closer to all earthlings. Before COVID, I was an athlete, wheelchair athlete, playing wheelchair rugby. That's me in my rugby chair competing in the Good Life Halvesy. The significance of me doing the Good Life Halvesy is I think I'm probably the first and only C5 quadriplegic to do a Good Life Halvesy because my disability level barely qualifies me to be even pushing in a manual wheelchair. And the significance of me doing it is I did it from a rugby chair, which is designed for a brutal sport of pretty much slamming into each other and having that capability. So racing chairs are usually anywhere from 4 pounds to 18 pounds, whereas my rugby chair is 49 plus pounds. So it was a very difficult task pushing 13.5 miles through that. My bottom picture here shows myself and my teammates when we were professionals playing wheelchair rugby, traveling across the nation. Our name of our group, team was the Midwest Rugby Rebels. I can be kind, funny, decent human. I try to be respectful and understanding. I try to do what the right thing is, and I always try to avoid using deception and dishonesty. I had been actively involved doing alcohol and drug counseling for approximately 5 years at Matt Talbot Kitchen Outreach here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I think I might switch this screening to the top real quick. Maybe it's more out of the way. We'll see. I became officially employed at, I became officially employed as a provisionally licensed alcohol and drug counselor December 15th, 2015, or December 4th. This was also time that I chose to become recognized as someone that's going to stop eating animals and using animal products, originally and primarily because of the consequences of animal agriculture on the environment. My intention to learn more and more about veganism was created and has not stopped. I have reinforcers to forever be vegan to include animal compassion, social justice, national security, public and personal health. As an alcohol and drug counselor, I loved my job. I found it meaningful, rewarding, and in need of work. On the other hand, the more I learned about veganism, the more I realized the extent of all the consequences of my choices, extending beyond just abstaining from eating animal products. I often recite and I try to live in according to the following quote. And to me, this quote means you have to always be willing and ready to put your life and your life choices to the test to see if it is ethical and matching with whom you profess to be and in focus with the future you want to create. Then have the courage to recognize and know who you are and then follow through with personal improvement. I started to develop a passion of wanting to personally be involved in spreading truths, exposing lies about animal agriculture, using critical thinking, evidence-based research involving science. I tried very hard to balance my professional life as an alcohol and drug counselor and still be involved with veganism by becoming a volunteer presenter for Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. However, time is a scarce resource, and in time, I felt like I needed to choose to give my attention to either strengthening my ability to be the very best alcohol and drug counselor I could be for my clients during their most important, challenging transition from an active addict to someone living a satisfying, sober life, or to channel my attention to being the best animal rights vegan activist that I could be. Of course, I wouldn't be here today if I didn't choose being animal rights activist. So I went with my heart and I went with my true passion and what I felt was the most important, urgent thing to be doing right here, right now, for the continued existence of the world and all living things. So I resigned from my career as an alcohol and drug counselor at Matt Talbot, with my last day being June 17th, 2019, and I became a full-time animal rights vegan activist. I was then on the journey As an empath, spending my time discovering how I can effectively communicate with people to help them become aware of the power and responsibility of their choices. Help people make choices coinciding with their professed morals, beliefs, thoughts, and values. I feel like the first form of my activism of doing PowerPoint presentations about the consequences of our food choices in the science classes of high schools here in Lincoln was hugely positively influential, because I'm speaking to an audience that is seeking and forming a personal identity involving appearance, personality, acceptable friends, and character development. Part of character development involves learning information while also processing it to see if it is valid and something that they want to defend as a truth, even if it goes against beliefs of older generations. I deeply encouraged high school students to actively take the responsibility for looking at the things that we currently do and be willing to question their validity, moving towards the life and world that they wanted to create and live in. Ultimately, this form of activism was cut short quickly because I was unfairly banned from presenting critical thinking information from all Lincoln public schools. Systems of power do not want to be publicly transparent, and they do not want to be exposed for lies and dangers they impose on all of us. Because prior to COVID-19, the presentations that I was giving in these schools included information about the increased likelihood of a pandemic coming from an animal origin. I was left trying to figure out other ways to continue my activism, so I started with opening up a Facebook account under my name, but with the sole purpose of expanding my activism possibilities by looking for other vegans who are sharing knowledge to the public by doing activism events. Of course, I did friend request many people I knew on a professional level, personal friends and family members who did not know much or anything about being vegan. This way we could see each other's posts, learn about things that we care about and value. I always look for opportunities to have a mutual dignified conversation without trying to sound like I'm instigating a debate which has a winner and a loser. I ran into a Facebook ad put out by the Humane League looking for a volunteer changemaker captain who could find and work with leaders in their community to organize volunteers. Their mission is to end the abuse of animals raised for food. I thought this was perfect for me because I have a decent amount of communication skills learned from directing my own independent cares as a wheelchair user and also being an alcohol and drug counselor. So in September of 2019, I became the first and only volunteer changemaker captain here in Nebraska. For me, Facebook is the platform for all of my activism. As a changemaker captain, I had available to me a wealth of information from the Humane League to equip me to be a better activist and to create these Facebook events. It was like receiving a free college education of activism that is researched to be the most effective. All forms of activism require building relationships to build a community and engage in collaborations. Types of animal vegan rights activism I have done and currently do these are some of them, include corporation protests. Corporation protest usually involves me being on public sidewalks, me and others, near and around the targeted business, holding signs and taking lots of pictures to spread on social media. And then also doing Google reviews of the corporation and perhaps how the people in that that single business, how they may have treated us. Also, there is a platform called Fast Action Network that is it's pretty much exclusive with the Humane League. Basically, it involves doing online actions to hold food corporations accountable to their public commitments to improve animal welfare. They are simple and effective to do and can complement anyone's time schedule because you can complete an activism action in less than a minute. Placing leaflets and event announcements and volunteer sheets with pull tabs on community boards of grocery stores and coffee shops. Theater screening of the movie, The Invisible Vegan. This involves reserving a local theater screen and paying the screening rights to the producers of the movie. I was able to do this because I collaborated with Veg Fund, which helped pay for the screening rights of the movie. And then I also came to know a local heart surgeon who is vegan in Nebraska named Dr. James Waddle. And he previously, a couple months prior before me asking him to help with the filming of this movie, he brought the Game Changers movie to the theaters here. And so I just reached out to him and asked him if he would help with the cost of the theater costs, and he was happy to do that. Letters to the editor consist of me writing an opinion in several Nebraska newspapers, usually at a word count of anywhere from 250 words all the way up to 350 words. As of right now, I have 63 total letters published in 9 different newspapers across Nebraska. Writing animal farmers themselves involved me writing up and sending out letters to local Nebraska animal farmers to briefly tell them about me, why I was writing them, and introduce them to some entities specializing in transitioning animal farms into plant-based farms that collaborate them with and help collaborate them with companies making plant-based meat. I did this because it was ideal time. It was during COVID-19 where a lot of local Nebraska farmers they had all these animals and they couldn't bring them to slaughterhouse because of COVID-19, and they were faced with killing off their own animals themselves. And a lot of farmers couldn't do that. They were used to being the providers of the animals, and they were used to just taking them to the slaughterhouse. And so I thought that was a good time to write them. And I would like to believe that I had influenced some farmers to do that, because since then there have been some farmers that have worked with transformation or transformation, and that's been a success. All right, personal sign holding, I usually do at downtown Haymarket Farmers Market because it's within less than a block distance of me. It starts in May and goes till October, middle of October, every Saturday in downtown Lincoln Haymarket from about 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. I'll fly a different thought-provoking sign message on my wheelchair that I helped modify this sign. I've done climate marches where I would fly signs again on the side of my power chair, which I'm going to show you some pictures here soon. I've been involved in organizing public sidewalk chalking. The last one I participated in was September 2nd of 2022. I've done public street surveys where I make thought-provoking 5 to 6 minute surveys using Google Docs and QR codes. And as an enticing thank you, I give participants $1 for completing the survey. The surveys are completely anonymous, but it does give participants a chance to leave their email if they would like to have further information. There are intentional questions to help participants feel comfortably honest to give feedback, even if it is negative feedback. Pay per view in a public atmosphere, we ask people to participate in watching a 5-minute movie, and then as a thank you, we give them a $1 bill. Anonymous for the voiceless, cubes of truth, I have done those. But always attempting to meet people where they are at with a genuine interest, even if it doesn't involve talking about veganism, like being an ally when someone is in a pressed situation, or having a decent, dignified conversation with someone with the goal both people leave the conversation feeling it was good. Now I'm going to talk to you more in depth about a couple of these I feel have been successful. I have done protests at McDonald's, Sonic, Dunkin' Donuts, and Starbucks. Since the corporations targeted are so huge, incremental change may not sound like a lot of progress, but any small change to disrupt factory farming is a meaningful win for the animals and public safety. It starts with a corporation like Dunkin' Donuts, making a public commitment to do something to improve their animal welfare policies. People will normally see this and they'll feel better about it and better about eating there without necessarily following up with the company and making them accountable for what they have stated. The Humane League, with activists, pressures these corporations to be transparent with their progress, to include the importance of using third-party verification. Dunkin' Donuts has failed to fulfill their commitment, and so on June 19th, 2022, we show up. I'm going to click on this. And it's going to bring up Channel 8 News, which I will scroll down here a bit. And unfortunately, there's no way of me getting rid of first 15 seconds being an advertisement.
Southeast Community College, your path to possible.
Consumers across the U.S. are protesting at various Dunkin' Donut locations. The protest is in regards to their failure to keep their 2015 promise to source all eggs from cage-free hens. Members of the Humane League in Lincoln gathered outside the Dunkin' Donut located on Old Cheney Road. Their mission: to end the abuse of all animals raised for produce.
The reason we want people to go cage-free, or the Dunkin' Donuts to go cage-free, is because currently egg suppliers are putting 7 to 8 hens in cages called battery cages, and the individual moving space per hen is less than the size of a standard sheet of paper.
While Dunkin' promised consumers to reach their goal of going 100% cage-free by 2025, right now they are only at 11% cage-free, causing some consumers to demand change now.
My first and most accommodating method of sign holding for me involved solid mounting a large magnetic whiteboard sign on my silver power wheelchair. My hands do not voluntarily work, so instead of me easily dismissing myself from the sign holding activism, I simply chose to adapt to something that will work for me. These are pictures of us activists at a corner of farmers market. Apart from me having this sign, other activists were drawing vegan messages on the animal leather seats of my van. While I'm getting physical exercise pushing in my manual rugby chair, I have a white magnetic sign about the size of a standard sheet of paper clipped on the back with weekly new messages. My old school skateboarding helmet I have tagged with stickers announcing I'm an ally and against all forms of oppression. Another form of individual animal rights activism I recently did was I vinyl wrapped my power wheelchair. So wherever I go, people are going to be confronted with the vegan message to include animal liberation and ending speciesism. I've also put an LED kit under the seat of my wheelchair. So at night, when that lights up, it really pops those white letters out really good. So this next screen, yes, that looks like there's a black box, and there is. But before I click on it to show you a video, I'm just gonna describe what I'm gonna do or what I'm gonna share. So I'm gonna share a video of me and other vegan activists being a vendor in a public event called Streets of Live. This event focuses the community on being physically healthy through exercise and healthy dietary choices. It's put on every year for one day from morning to afternoon for a couple of hours. Every year, a different neighborhood is selected to host. It involves closing down streets in neighborhoods from vehicle traffic and instead invites families to physically participate by whatever means they can: walking, running, riding a bike, skates, skateboard, scooter, whatever they choose, to go around a whole 2-mile course, which has many vendors giving away educational materials, water, healthy foods, and snacks. Now we're going to click on the video here.
Hey, this is Robert Reek. It is September 22nd, 2019, and I'm here with a group of volunteer animal rights vegan activists at an outdoor event called Streets Alive here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Veg Fund is co-sponsoring this event. What we are offering attendees at this event today is a paid per-view experience in which children and adults can watch appropriate videos. The children's video is called What a Child Sees and is a short YouTube video showing the innocent relationship two children have with their animal friends at a farm sanctuary and why they choose not to eat animals. For the mature audience, the videos being shared are called 10 Billion Lives and Have We Been Lied To, which show graphic common farming practices in relationship to animal agriculture. We are trying to elicit and encourage healthy family conversations about the consequences of food choices. We also provide scientific and doctor-approved information supporting the negative health consequences of animal agriculture in our diet. We feel people with this information make healthier decisions about what they support and eat.
All right, I am just going to mute it there to speak. Since we were officially part of this event, people and families noticed they easily approached us, our table, to learn about what we were sharing, and participated without hesitation or
Robert, your
hesitation.
video is still at full
Kids
volume.
were asked the following questions after watching the video. Do you love animals? Would you like animals to be your friend or food?
Robert, your video
Which
is at
farm
full
animals would
volume.
you like to become friends with? All the kids, most of the kids answered, do you love animals? With a resounding yes. But there was one kid who said no. So we asked the kid said that he answered no because they didn't love animals because they thought they were scary. However, this kid also
Robert, can you hear
chose
us?
animals to be his friend rather than
Robert!
Get this, he identified the goat as the animal that he would like to become friends with. So I was just like, wow, this is like the tastier animals to become friends with. This kid was very So in my opinion, this survey showed children do not discriminate between sentient beings when they say they love animals and want to treat them kindly. So based on which animal a child chose to be friends with, we gave them a picture of a farm animal resident that they could visit at the Iowa Farms. Speciesism is an oppressive force, just like all these other forms of oppression, that I stand firmly against and I try to get involved in as an ally when I see the opportunity that fits in my life. It is another way of meeting people where they are at with experiencing forms of oppression very real in their life. I feel there is an importance to vividly announce to the public by some means of where you stand as an ally against oppressive forces. So I decided to use my white privilege to be an ally in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. I did this by getting my van vinyl wrapped, so wherever I go, it is clear I am an ally of the BLM movement seeking justice, equality, and freedom. As a result of being a genuine ally, sometimes it creates the perfect atmosphere when someone becomes curiously interested in veganism. This happened when this picture right here, when a Black mother and her young son were on a date night together in the Haymarket where I live. As they were ending their evening, they saw my van and took some pictures and posted appreciation on Facebook. One of this person's friends knows me through my younger sister and identified me as the owner of the van. And so we connected, which we briefly had a conversation over Facebook. And I asked her if I could post the picture of her son on my Facebook page. The next thing you know, I'm getting a Facebook message from another Black woman saying she saw my post and loves what I did with my van, and then says, I noticed you're vegan. I also want to learn more about things that may help me to be vegan successful because I often relapse. So we start a mutual conversation where I'm messaging her, where I'm sending her information on a daily basis for a while. And now we are still friends on Facebook. I participate in activism using different subjects, but ultimately they can improve the lives of animals. First, let's talk about environmental. Starbucks is a large money-making corporation who made public sustainability claims to cut their carbon, water, and waste in half by 2030 in everything that they serve. Dairy milk is not sustainable because it uses more water and land, produces the most greenhouse gases, and causes the most damage to natural bodies of water by creating dead zones, killing all of the inhabitants. If Starbucks wants to make measurable progress with their sustainability claims, they need to consider removing dairy and instead exclusively offer earth-friendly plant-based milk and eliminate the surcharge of this milk. There is also the subject of social justice. If Starbucks wants to be inclusive to customers of color, they need to eliminate the surcharge of plant-based milk options because these individuals have a much higher rate of lactose intolerance and shouldn't be charged extra to enjoy the same latte as others. This is going to be the last video in this presentation. It's going to, actually, I jump-started that. Actually, in 2023, myself and other members of the Anti-Animal Abuse Social Club collaborated with PETA to do 5 protests at Starbucks and then a vegan jerky giveaway. After each protest, a couple of us volunteers started doing honest Google review, talking about the Starbucks as a corporation and our experience with individual staff members of each Starbucks we did a protest at. At our protest, we film and take pictures courtesy of volunteer activist friend Timothy Turner. This one single picture that you're seeing here that was submitted to a Google review has received over 200,000 public views. Only because of us few activists coming together to make events happen, I surprisingly received an Outstanding Activist of 2023 recognition framed plaque signed by the president of PETA. When I posted this on Facebook, I made the comment that I appreciate getting such a plaque, but I would definitely trade this plaque to just be working with 2 or 3 more activists on a regular basis. Now we're going to get to the last video in this presentation. It involves me and other members of the Anti-Animal Abuse Social Club Omaha collaborating with PETA to pressure Starbucks to remove the surcharge on plant-based milk options, and by doing so, ending their discrimination against mostly people of color. This is going to bring up my, well, let's see, what is it going to not bring up? Well, I need to go to my YouTube video, I guess. I tried this before and it worked. So let's see. We'll go to my channel. And let me scroll down here. I believe this is the one.
The definition of discrimination is, open quote, the unjust treatment of different categories. Definition of discrimination is.
Let me enable volume.
Is, open quote, the unjust treatment of different categories of people, close quote. When a customer is charged an additional 70 cents for a plant-based milk in their coffee because they are lactose intolerant and or do not support the animal exploitation involved in dairy milk, this upcharge is a form of discrimination. So what is Starbucks' stance on discrimination? Taken directly from their two-page Starbucks Principles for Upholding the Third Place for our partners, our customers, and our communities, open quote, discrimination is inconsistent with our mission and values. We strive to eliminate discrimination and implicit bias from every aspect of our business, close quote. This 70-cent surcharge placed on plant-based milk choosing customers is also in contradiction to what makes the Starbucks mission come to life in the promotion of equitable, diverse, and inclusive cultures. There is no promotion in charging extra. I strongly feel even if plant-based milks cost more for Starbucks to serve, this financial discomfort should rightfully be absorbed by the corporation, just like the increased expenses to be ADA compliant for people with disabilities. I'm encouraging everyone to call Starbucks at 1-800-782-7282 and encourage them to end the discrimination surcharge.
All right. Now let me exit out of here. Okay. The very last thing I want to share with you about being an effective vegan activist with a disability involves sharing my memoir story as a means to relate to others. I strongly feel many people mistakenly think vegans are extreme, and because of this, fail to see any similarities that can help maintain human connectivity. I would like to believe everyone who reads my book will be able to relate with me somewhere within it, thus bringing us together with more understanding. If this does happen, this could create better consideration to veganism. So here we have a QR code that you can scan that will go and you can see my updates. Right now, my book, tomorrow is April 2nd. My book from my publisher will be for me to review the interior of my book. And once I approve the interior of my book, it will be available in paperback, hardback, and ebook. If you purchase it online, I'm going to be setting it up so that my book, all the profits benefit another changemaker captain that I had worked with in the past who lives in New York. She had a real bad adverse reaction to the Pfizer vaccine, which burnt out her kidneys. And so she's waiting for a transplant, which could be up to 4 years. In the meantime, she's not able to work and she relies on a lot of donations. So I figured I was just gonna let my online book sales benefit her. There's also, when you click on that, when you go to the QR code or you go to that link, Word Up Chili at Wix site, you can also purchase, pre-purchase a book to become an official author sponsor of my book, which helps me pay for the publishing fees of the book. And also for those people who can't afford my book at all, if you go to Vegan Peace Press at Gmail and just send me a link and say, hey, can I get a free version of your book? I will happily send you a PDF version of my book, which you can actually have your computer read it back to you in whatever language that you want. So I thought that was pretty cool too. So that's my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and I can answer questions.
Thank you, Robert. Everyone who presented today is an activist in their own right, but you are an activist. You have done so much compelling work, and oftentimes work that touches on your own disabilities and how you adapt yourself to the movement. So it was wonderful listening to you, Robert, share all this insight with us. And I would just like everyone to give Robert a round of applause. You can probably only hear me, but congratulations, Robert. We are going to move into our Q&A session, and I'm going to give everyone the ability to unmute themselves. Give me just one moment. And welcome, Alex and Ashish. I know who you are. You're people I know. Yes, you can unmute yourself. So if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or just jump in at an opportune time and share it with Robert. Come on, you have to have some questions. You covered a lot of ground. Oh, Annie, I think Annie's trying to ask a question. Annie, please unmute yourself. Or Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, you can also type in the chat and I will communicate your question. Oh, okay, so let me go back. Let me check the settings. Okay, it should be fixed now. I'm very sorry. I'm sorry, Robert and everyone else.
So, can I say something quickly?
Absolutely.
I was just wondering, as a physically disabled person, if you had any tips on, activism without physically exhausting yourself, because it took me a while to realize that I'm physically disabled as well as mentally disabled, because I had actually had a really bad fall in November, and I was just talking to somebody about it. I was like, oh yeah, no, all my joints hurt and I'm tired all the time. No, that's normal. And they're like, no, that's not normal. And I was like, really? So yeah, so I realized that actually, that I like physics. I mean, it's because I can technically walk and I can talk and everything. I've always never thought of myself as disabled, even though I got diagnosed with autism 11 years ago. Anyway, I was wondering if you had any tips on on pacing yourself, basically, so you just end up just like burnt out for 4 days, because that's actually happened to me before. I spent 4 days in bed. So yeah.
Well, I'm going to share with you some links because one of the links I will be sharing is how to volunteer with the Humane League. And once you sign up for that and you sign up for a time slot to get introduced to the Humane League, you get introduced to like a community board, which has all different ways that you can participate in activism. And I'm sure Kyle has a lot of different ways also people can do activism. One things that I'm thinking of at the top of my head is Fast Action Network, because that's a platform that you use on your phone or your computer. Also writing letters to the editor or just making phone calls. I mean, there's just so many different forms of activism like that. But let me leave some links. I'm looking where I need to put links at. Is it in notes or whiteboard? Do you know where I need to where I could leave the links?
Chat. Yeah, you can put it in the chat. It's like a thought bubble, and it says chat right beneath it. It's on the I don't know what they call it, a command bar where all the other options like screen share are. But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. I've heard and seen great things of your work. Eloisa, you had your hand raised. Are you still here? Would you like to ask Robert a question?
Yes, thank you. Robert, thank you so much for that great and inspiring presentation. You do so much incredible work. And to Annie's point, I'm impressed as how you don't get exhausted. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, your work in Nebraska, because it is such a challenging state to do animal advocacy. And I wanted to know a little bit more about how you found that community and when you were turned away from doing this great work you were doing in the schools. We do a lot of school work here. If you continue to press, did you find out any more information about where that resistance was coming from? Just because we often, hear the challenges there from activists across the board of how challenging it is in that state.
Yeah, I did hear some more. I'm going to say it's in my book, if you want to read the details about it, just for more room for more questions. But I wanted to fight it. I was ready to go, and I feel like I'm always in. Because I'm always fighting for injustices on many grounds. And so I was ready to do it, but Factory Farming Awareness Coalition did not want me to pursue that. So they were worried that if I started to fight against it, that they would have to deal with the legal issues also. So they weren't willing to do that. And since I was a volunteer presenter for them, and it wasn't just me, I respectfully just kind of hung low on that. So.
Thank you. I will pick up the book and read the rest of the story.
And is there any other, I answered a little, there may have been more to that question. Is there any other questions I missed that you asked in there?
Yeah, I guess, my question was more about the challenges of doing the advocacy in general in Nebraska. And really, it seems like you have, besides all the activism that you have done, have been a part of shaping the activism community there. And, any pointers for all of those of us, trying to build community would be great.
Well, I could always use pointers too. So, but my biggest challenge is finding people that are willing to volunteer and get involved. I do find a lot of people that surprisingly, they don't know their rights, and they think that even a peaceful protest that we're going to get arrested, or even if the police show up, we're going to get arrested. And there's been times that's happened, and I'm glad that the people I volunteer with, they got to experience it, and then we got to talk about it. Like some of them were like, "Oh my God, we almost got arrested." And I'm like, "No, I want to point out that we didn't even come close to getting arrested. Just because the police show up, they have to show up because someone called them. But I have to show them that difference and show them that we have so many rights that we can do stuff." And so that's the difficult part. I think ever since COVID hit, people are a little bit more reclusive as far as not stepping out, not having that courage to step out of their comfort zone. And I try to just be that living testament that you can step out of your comfort zone. There's ways of adapting things because there's so many things that I can't do. And like the videos that I shared with you, those would not be possible without members of the Anti-Animal Abuse Social Club Omaha, which I always give a shout out to them. They're very active. Some of them are with us today, and I'm glad to see that they're here. And because without that kind of community, I wouldn't be able to share everything that I share. I would just be by myself. Another thing that I am doing when I find it hard to find people to do something and I would like to independently do it myself, I'm going to be getting some Ray-Ban glasses that are smart glasses that are camera enabled, so I can voice dictate to turn the camera on and off. I can voice dictate taking pictures, so then I can independently go into grocery stores with my signs, my thought-provoking signs about what are we doing, eating animals and stuff. And I'll be able to live stream all that, so I can add that to my video content without needing anyone else. So hopefully that answers a little bit more. But I just like to communicate with people one-on-one. I always invite one-on-one conversations to work with you individually. So if you ever want to collaborate with me, let's get together and talk, and we can work some issues out.
Absolutely. I'll contact you after the talk. Thank you so much for all of that.
Yep.
Thank you, Robert. We have time for just one or two more questions. One person asked, though I cannot find it again, how do you justify the sort of like the offsets to remove the surcharge on plant-based milk at Starbucks? How would you explain that to, say, a family member who doubts whether that can be done without harming the company?
Without harming the company, that, yeah, because I believe I saw a quote, don't hold me on this, but they make like $25 billion annually. They make a lot of money. And the thing with Starbucks is when they serve overseas, and they don't charge any surcharge for plant-based options overseas. It's only in the United States where they charge this. And so then they start making statements about being inclusive, and then they make the statements about being sustainable. I just use their wording. I print out their wording, and I can easily show that to family members or anyone. This is what they say, and this is what we're asking, and just show them that it's pretty clear cut, in my opinion. And so when I show that to them, they understand it a lot more.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. Let's end on one final question. And this has actually been posed twice. How can we make activism spaces more friendly for people with autism? We have two people with autism asking this question, and I might as well join the list.
I honestly don't know. I don't know how to answer that one. I need to learn more about autism. That's where it first starts. So starting today, I will put that in my notes to learn more about autism, and I can maybe generate a way better answer. Because right now I am going to put this out there. I am completely ignorant about autism. And I realized that as I joined this at 11 a.m. And as I heard the first two speakers, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of things I need to work on. Oh, there's another thing I need to work on. And we always are finding ourselves saying different things wrong. And right now, I hope that everyone that was listening to me, if they saw anything that I said that was a little insensitive or whatever, bring it to my attention, whether you want to do it now or you want to text me or email me later. I want to know, because I would love to keep improving on things at all times.
Can I just quickly say something? Sorry. God, I sound English. It's such a contrast, because actually I used to sound more like you guys. Anyway, that's a whole other story. I moved when I was 7. Anyway, yes. One general tip, you know, anyone autistic listening, and also just in general, you know, for anyone trying to accommodate autistic people, is light. For me, I've recently realized is a huge thing. Like 2 weeks ago, I had to take my dog to the groomers for the first time ever, and they had to do a very intense other thing. And it was a very, very bright day, and I was just in bed for 3 days afterwards. And then I got these blue light blocking glasses from this company called, I think, Theraspecs. And it's really helped. Like, you know, like now I literally don't leave the house without them. So I feel like, you know, like light levels are one big accommodation, I think. All the blue light levels, like here I have like a blue light free lamp, and it's just really, really, you know, take some of the input off, basically. Yeah, that's it, really.
Absolutely. Thank you for your commentary, Annie. And first, I need to thank you, Robert, for such a remarkably candid and humble response, because you're exactly correct. There are plenty of conditions and situations that we don't really understand, and until we educate ourselves and or experience those things ourselves, we can't really fully comprehend what other people are going through. So yes, thank you for that response. I would say this as an autistic vegan to all the non-autistic people out there: the best way you can make activism spaces more friendly for autistic people is to not be a judgmental prick. It's that easy. I mean, there are sorts of plenty of other things that should be done, and which vary from person to person, but in general, people can be very judgmental if you have autism or certain mental conditions. In fact, those they can kind of ruin your life. But anyway, yes, thank you so much, Robert. It is 2:08, so we started about 8 minutes late. We're going to end about 8 minutes late, and I'm going to wind up this conference for everyone. But before you leave, I want you to know that we're going to transition into a roundtable discussion where each of you will have a turn to discuss your experiences as a disabled person in the movement. So stick around for that. So I also want to say thank you for making this dream come true. I've been wanting to do something around disability rights and animal rights and veganism since the pandemic, since roughly the time the pandemic began. And I'm so glad that 4 years later, it's finally happening. So thank you for making this dream come true. Thank you so much for joining us for our first annual Disabled Vegan Expo. Nothing about us without us, as Patrice said.